HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Peacemakers, Leadership Lessons from 20th-Century Statesmanship by Bruce W. Jentleson, read by Mike Chamberlain. At crucial moments, at turning points, individuals and their decisions and acts can determine the course of history. Isaiah Berlin. Preface. My students got me thinking. Toward the end of the U.S. foreign policy course I taught in the early 1980s at the University of California, Davis, I'd ask the students their thoughts on the future. Well, Professor Jentleson, one earnest young man said, I think the Cold War will end, and end peacefully. From another bright-eyed one, apartheid will end, and South Africa will transition to a black-majority democracy. My responses were along the lines of it's nice to be young, naive, and California dreaming, but let's be realistic. The Cold War did end, and without a shot fired. Apartheid did end, and the political transition that followed was impressively civil. While many factors came into play in both situations, the extraordinary leadership provided by Mikhail Gorbachev and Nelson Mandela was the crucial one. In graduate school, we were steered away from focusing on individual leaders. International affairs, the canon held, were driven largely by systemic forces and such timeless dynamics as national interest and balance of power. Yet, as Oxford's eminent Soviet expert Archie Brown put it, no politically conceivable alternative candidate for the general secretaryship in the mid-1980s, other than Gorbachev, would have acted in the same way. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, typically so conservative and dour, was struck by how Gorbachev's personality could not have been more different from the wooden ventriloquism of the average Soviet apparatchik. Mandela's commitment to reconciliation, hardly a given for someone who'd spent 27 years as a political prisoner, nurtured the rebirth of his own nation and presented the world with a very different model from retribution and revenge. As James Joseph, U.S. Ambassador to South Africa in the Mandela years and a noted expert on leadership and a colleague at Duke, put it, once I got to know him, Mandela, I felt that he even exceeded the myth, which is rare about a human being. This didn't have me invoking great man theories of history, but it did call to mind Isaiah Berlin's insight that, at crucial moments, at turning points, individuals and their decisions and acts can determine the course of history. So, over the years, I got thinking about two other questions. First, who else in the 20th century was a profile in statesmanship, a global counterpart to John F. Kennedy's Profiles in Courage, shaping a major breakthrough for peace? The leaders I include in the book were not totally successful, but all sought to be transformational in the ways that Isaiah Berlin speaks to, whether in forging rapprochement between major powers or promoting reconciliation of peoples, or in such other ways crucial to international peace and justice as building international institutions, advancing freedom and human rights, and protecting global sustainability. And, as we'll hear, I consider not only leaders of countries, but also leaders of key international institutions and pioneering non-governmental organizations, NGOs, who did for peace and justice what governments could not or would not do. A second question followed from the first. What can we learn from 20th century statesmanship for the 21st century? For a while, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, it seemed like the world was going in a positive direction. The Cold War was ending peacefully. Dictatorships were falling to democracy. Globalization appeared to be spreading the wealth. History was said to be over, with world affairs so harmonious as to be downright boring. And yet the end of the Cold War has not meant the end of war. U.S. relations with both Russia and China have grown tense and tenuous. That democratic wave has broken up on some rocky shores. Globalization has had losers as well as winners, History has come roaring back, its ancient hatreds fueled by modern venom. Climate change is speeding up. Global health pandemics are spreading. Cyber and other emerging technologies are in need of rules of the game, but aren't getting them. Indeed, it's a lot easier to name a global problem that's been growing worse than one on which progress is being made. Meeting these and other 21st century challenges has many dimensions. Some bottom-up solutions will be generated by the people power of protest movements. Others will be middle-out answers from science, technology, economics, education, and other fields. But much must come top-down from global leaders who are able and willing to try to be transformational, to break out of narrow tunnel vision thinking and myopic focus on today, but not tomorrow. For just as the world is so interconnected that, as Thomas Friedman put it, weak leadership in one country now deeply impacts so many others, so too can bold and visionary leadership have global impact. This was my thinking even before Donald Trump was elected President of the United States. All along, I've intended this book to draw lessons from 20th-century statesmanship to help shape and motivate the peace and security breakthroughs our 21st century era so crucially needs. Trump, as I come back to in the epilogue, has made this all the more urgent. Others, such as Vladimir Putin, do as well. In so many ways, we are at one of those crucial moments, turning points, that Isaiah Berlin spoke to, at which leaders will determine the next course history takes, for the worse or for the better. Introduction. Does history make statesmen, or do statesmen make history? Any proper study of political leadership has to start with this question. At one end of the debate is the 19th century Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle's heroic conception that the history of what man has accomplished in this world is at bottom the history of the great men who have worked here. All things that we see standing accomplished in the world are properly the outer material result, the practical realization and embodiment of thoughts that dwell in the great men sent into the world. At the other end is his English contemporary Herbert Spencer deriding the universal love of personalities, going back well before People magazine and Yahoo celebrity, to when round the campfire assembled savages tell the events of the day's chase, and he among them who has done some feat of skill or agility is duly lauded. Carlyle is too much the romanticist, and overstates the role of individuals, while undervaluing conducive conditions that create opportunities for leadership. Spencer is too much the sociologist, overstating social processes and context, and undervaluing what the 20th century American philosopher Sidney Hook calls the individual to whom we can justifiably attribute preponderant influence in determining an issue or event whose consequences would have been profoundly different if he had not acted as he did. The academic literature digs deeper than the latest who's up and who's down, but with some notable exceptions, too often stays at a level of abstraction that glosses over the impact that leaders do have. The talk inside the D.C. Beltway and among journalists can get too caught up in personalities, but often does consider critical decision-making. Analytic balance requires a 3 C's approach, recognizing that history and broad social forces create constraints as well as conducive conditions, but don't determine the choices that are made. Although no individual is so extraordinary as to achieve transformational impact irrespective of the context, it also is not a given that any and all leaders would have been able to pull off comparable statesmanship accomplishments. It's a matter of man or woman and moment, fit and timing, bounded by constraints and conducive conditions with choices to be made. We actually think this way a lot when it comes to bad guy leaders. Take Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. Deep socio-political dynamics and a severe economic crisis in Germany in the 1920s and 1930s fed instability and resentment. But the particular road Germany took, from the pursuit of continental conquest to the perpetration of the Holocaust, had much to do with who the leader was. Similarly, policies such as the Soviet Great Terror of 1937 to 1938 and the deliberate starvation of Ukrainians, as Princeton historian David Bell writes, were a function of Stalin's character and his particular strategies for seizing and maintaining power for himself. And in Cuba, decades of repression and corruption made the country ripe for revolution, but Fidel Castro put his own stamp on the kind of revolution it was. In deciding on which 20th-century peacemakers to focus on, I've had three main criteria in mind: transformational statesmanship more than transactional diplomacy. Drawn from scholars such as James McGregor Burns and Joseph S. Nye, Jr., this distinction is between efforts at making major breakthroughs in global peace and security and efforts at diplomacy geared to managing and resolving issues in the normal course of events. While transactional diplomacy is often undervalued for its day-to-day, issue-by-issue utility, our focus here, instead, is on those crucial moments and turning points at which, as in the opening quote from Isaiah Berlin, individuals and their decisions and acts can determine the course of history. If our criterion were full transformational success, it would yield a rather brief book. Still, these are critical junctures, breakthroughs marked by significant progress on issues long thought intractable. They make further progress possible, but cannot guarantee it. Backlashes and backsliding may follow. We draw lessons both from what was achieved and what wasn't. Statesmanship Moneyball. The wins against replacement player statistic, WARP, which calculates how much one player contributes to team victories over alternative players at the same position, is one of the most useful parts of the Moneyball craze in Major League Baseball. Scholarly studies of political leadership use more formal language, such as actor indispensability, where a leader acts significantly different than another leader in the same situation would have acted. Actor indispensability has been shown to bear especially on situations such as transformational statesmanship, when, as political scientist Fred Greenstein put it, the more demanding the political act, the greater the likelihood that it will be influenced by personal characteristics of the actor. While there is no neat diplo-ball, statesman above replacement leader, Sarl sabermetric, evidence can be marshaled to make the same point. Who the player or leader is makes a big difference, and not only with some already prominent figures, but also with some lesser-known ones. Impact had, not position held. Typically, when we think of statesmanship, we turn to presidents and prime ministers, secretaries of state and ministers of foreign affairs, and other leaders of nation-states. While emphasizing national leaders, I also include transformational leaders from international institutions, social movements, and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, who did for peace and justice what governments were unable or unwilling to do. To get a handle on international peace and security, I break it out into the following 5 component dimensions. 1. Managing major power rivalries. Limiting the geopolitical competition and conflict between major powers that historically has been a leading cause of war. 2. Building international institutions. Creating and strengthening global bodies for preventing conflict with the United Nations as the principal example. 3. Reconciling the politics of identity. Fostering reconciliation of peoples whose historically rooted hatreds have fed deadly conflicts. 4. Advancing freedom and protecting human rights. Ending colonization, democratizing countries from both communist rule and military regimes, and protecting individuals and groups from repression. And 5. Fostering global sustainability, promoting global development, environmental protection, and public health as matters of peace and security, not just economics and equity. As I thought about which 20th century leaders met the 3 criteria, I cast a wide net. In giving talks at various universities and other venues in the United States and internationally, I'd ask colleagues, students, and other audiences for their nominees. I mused about a social media game. The nominees list was becoming quite long, so I shifted to focusing on representative examples for each of the 5 dimensions of international peace and security. Who, then, are the profiles? Here's a quick preview. Managing major power rivalries. Henry Kissinger and Zhou Enlai for the seminal breakthrough in U.S.-China relations. Mikhail Gorbachev for his most crucial role in ending the Cold War. Building international institutions. Woodrow Wilson for his initial efforts at a global institution. Franklin D. Roosevelt for the founding of the United Nations. Dag Hammarskjöld, the Secretary General who showed how impactful the United Nations can be. Reconciling the politics of identity. Nelson Mandela for leading the fight to end apartheid through peaceful means and the global icon he became. Yitzhak Rabin for his pursuit of Arab-Israeli peace. Betty Williams and Mariad Corrigan, founders of Northern Ireland Women for Peace. Advancing freedom and protecting human rights. Mahatma Gandhi for fighting colonialism while embodying nonviolence. Lech Wałęsa for blazing the path to ending Eastern European communism. Aung San Suu Kyi for her defiant leadership of the political movement to end Burma's military dictatorship. Peter Benenson, founder of Amnesty International, the first contemporary human rights advocacy NGO. Fostering global sustainability. Gro Harlem Brundtland for advancing sustainable development and global public health. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for its work on global public health and exemplifying the increasing significance of philanthropy statesmanship. I offer 3 qualifiers about the profiles selected. First, selection is based on particular peacemaking roles, not leaders' overall foreign policies or other politics. Henry Kissinger is included for his China statesmanship, notwithstanding criticisms of his role in the Vietnam War, the 1970 to 1973 destabilization of Chile, and some other aspects of his foreign policy. Aung San Suu Kyi's role in the 2017 Rohingya crisis and ethnic cleansing against this Muslim minority has been at sharp variance with her earlier role in bringing democracy to Myanmar. Such intra-profile contrasts are brought into the discussion, including ways that help get at the factors explaining such stark variation. Second, in many of our cases, other leaders also had roles and impact. For example, Ronald Reagan along with Gorbachev, Yasser Arafat with Rabin, F.W. de Klerk with Mandela. But whereas Kissinger and Zhou had essentially equal roles and are thus made a paired profile, I bring those other leaders into the stories but don't find comparable proportionality or high Sarl actor indispensability. Third, the full set of profiles is heavily Western and mostly male. I've thought about these a great deal, and others have raised them at seminar and colloquium presentations. While it would be disingenuous to claim pure selection objectivity, these imbalances reflect the nature of an international system that for the last century has largely been dominated by the West and run by men. I take this up in the epilogue, including some indications of change in the geography and gender of global leadership. Genus leadership, species statesmanship. Who, why, how, what framework. Leadership is, as James McGregor Burns put it, one of the most observed and least understood phenomena on Earth. We have basic generic definitions like the capacity of an individual or group to change the thoughts, feelings, and actions of a significant number of individuals. Beyond that, it is, as noted author and public intellectual Walter Isaacson puts it, an elusive quality. Harvard's Barbara Kellerman cites close to 40 theories of leadership. International relations scholar Gabriel Scheffer starts his book with the expectation that there would be a large and well-defined body of theoretical and analytical literature, only to conclude that there is much less such work. That's not for lack of trying. Books abound. Some are about political leadership. Some are about business leadership. Some are philosophical. Some are how-to. There are books for virtually every domain of human activity. Walking through Heathrow Airport on a recent trip, the most prominent display in W.H. Smith was for Leading by Alex Ferguson, longtime manager of Manchester United Football Soccer Club. The Washington Post provides a reading list for strengthening your leadership chops. An Amazon search brought up 191,637 books for keyword leadership, 79,455 for political leadership, and 611 for statesmanship. One social science study provides a periodic table of leadership with 53 elements. Not quite the 118 of the natural world, but still. Nor is there a shortage of university-based leadership programs. Harvard has its Advanced Leadership Institute, New York University, its Center for Leadership and Action, Duke, its Hart Leadership Program, University of Virginia, its Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy, Claremont McKenna College, its Kravis Leadership Institute, and Stanford its Knight Hennessy Scholars Program for a new generation of global leaders. You can even get a PhD in leadership and change. And not just U.S. universities. For example, leadership studies courses can be found at the Sheikh Fatima bint Mubarak Program for Leadership at Zayed University in the United Arab Emirates. In the corporate world, a 2014 study estimated that $14 billion had been spent over the prior 2 decades on leadership development, twice as much as previously. Yet 75% of study respondents deemed the programs ineffective. People talk about leadership all the time, in many contexts, but with the same "we need leadership" and "how do we get it" mantras. For all this attention, one gets a sense of both fascination and frustration. Fascination in how, time and again, explanations of success and failure in such a range of professions and pursuits hone in on leadership as a key factor, and frustration in how difficult it is to define the elements of leadership with any degree of consistency, let alone to teach and cultivate them. Through a mix of muddling through and mining leadership studies and leadership programs, 4 lines of analysis emerge. Who were leaders as individuals? Why did they make the crucial choices they did? How did they pursue their goals? What was and wasn't achieved? This who, why, how, what framework both provides insights into the individual profiles and brings out patterns across them that help establish lessons going forward. Who? A man's rootage, as Woodrow Wilson once said, means more than his leafage. We look at our leaders' early lives and other shaping effects, getting a sense for their personas, with 3 caveats. First, there are no born leaders. There are more early signs of leadership in some cases than others, but in none is there anything akin to a statesmanship equivalent of Mozart, the 5-year-old prodigy, or LeBron James with NBA-level skills coming straight out of high school. As they develop into leaders, we do see that, as work by Margaret Herman shows, the higher the position held, the more likely personal characteristics come into play. Second, no indulging in hero worship, where leaders get so idealized as to become like talismans with a strong emotional tone that approaches the religious. None of these leaders were perfect people. FDR was unfaithful to his wife. Gandhi's moralism had its internal contradictions. Mandela had problematic relations with some of his own children. Third, avoid both one-size-fits-all models and laundry lists. There isn't a single persona type that works in all places at all times. Political psychology research has identified many factors that contribute to effective political leadership. But as Isaacson states at the outset of his Profiles in Leadership book, there is no one recipe for great leadership. One study provides an all of these list of integrity, intelligence, articulateness, collegiality, shrewd judgment, a questioning mind, willingness to seek disparate views, ability to absorb information, flexibility, courage, vision, empathy, boundless energy. Another presents a 5-factor model that meta-analyzed 222 correlations from 73 samples to determine which personality traits were most significant. While such extensive inventories are valuable for their comprehensiveness, they are less helpful for honing in on key qualities. 2 key who traits come through in varying combinations in our profiles. One is personal capital, meaning qualities the leader brings to the position separate from those inherent to it that strengthen the capacity to be transformational. Personal capital is distinct from social capital, which is more about bonds of shared identity within a broad community, and from political capital, which is more about resources to be distributed and rewards to be conferred. For leaders whose statesmanship requires broad popular support, personal capital has a strong moral dimension, a sense of commitment to the cause validated by family roots, sacrifices made and courage shown, charisma exuded, and other such personal bona fides that provide authenticity. In cases where the breakthroughs for peace are achieved more through formal diplomacy, professional stature is a key source of personal capital. This is a mix of expertise, prior achievements and service, and overall prestige that the individual brings to the position held. Political skills also are a key trait. It's not enough to have that personal capital. It has to be wielded effectively. Nan Cohane, former president of Duke and author of a book on leadership, emphasizes being able to devise the right combination of incentives, consequences, persuasion, and inspiration. Some of this is being adept at the inside game of working within the relevant policy arena, as Elizabeth Saunders emphasizes in her studies. Some is the outside game of mobilizing popular support. Much is about what Daniel Goleman dubbed emotional intelligence, a sense for what people are feeling and how to connect with them. The particulars vary situationally, but being able to ensure support for one's leadership is always crucial. Why? Woodrow Wilson was a college professor. Dag Hammarskjöld was widely viewed as the kind of faceless bureaucrat who would just go along with the major powers. Marriott Corrigan was a secretary at a Guinness brewery. Lech Wałęsa a dock worker. Peter Benenson a middling barrister. And Bill Gates didn't show signs of interest in much beyond the techie business world. Yet each came to possess a guiding vision that provided the why for transformation. A vision is really a story, a political one akin in form and functions to what we think of more broadly as narratives. It tells us where we want to go. It is about the future. It guides action, defines meaning, while also being goal-oriented. It reminds us who we are, is simultaneously
Sample complete. Ready to continue?